I'm very, very pleased and proud to be here. It's a privilege to be associated with this event. People who are speaking with me and the organizers, Donald and Daniel and Larry, and also thank Rebecca and Susan for their help, and also for our tech staff who are working under difficult operating conditions. Now, I'm just going to go straight to the question, since you all have done such a great job of, no, I can't get away with that, I guess. All right. So I'll go ahead and give you my remarks. Having wrapped themselves for decades in the mantle of the natural sciences in order to gain credibility with political and managerial establishment leaders, some environmentalists concede that this strategy involves a serious problem. While valuing the natural world highly and calling on others to join them in protecting it, environmentalists typically subscribe to a naturalistic materialism that either excludes value altogether or else regards it sociobiologically as an adaptive strategy useful for enhancing the survival chances for a certain species. For such naturalism, all phenomena are assumed to have only exterior aspects that can be analyzed wholly in third-person terms, that is, as its. In a world comprised of its, there is no place for me, you, us, that is, to the first and second-person perspectives. The interior domains that comprise aesthetic experience, morality, consciousness, subjectivity, freedom, value, intersubjectivity, and culture, considered in their own terms. Naturalism maintains that for something to be means for it to be a phenomenon, analyzable without remainder, I want to emphasize that, either into its externally observable parts and behaviors, or else into its functions within an externally observable system. From the perspective according to which there are only its, including human its, all talk of interiority is naive, retrograde, and misguided. So-called interior phenomena are topics for folk psychological discourse, which is not taken seriously by scientists who understand what is really going on. Folk psychology stands to contemporary cognitive science as false consciousness once stood to Soviet Marxism. Many environmentalists conclude that contemporary environmental problems often arise from anthropocentrism, according to which human rationality, consciousness, subjectivity, and moral capacity justify human domination of non-human beings. For such environmentalists, naturalism has worked against anthropocentrism, not only by denying that humans are the culmination of evolutionary purpose, for there is no such purpose, but also by eliminating the entire domain of interiority, with which subjectivity, spirituality, consciousness, and culture are associated. By pulling the rug out from human arrogance, environmentalists hope to save natural habitat from destruction. Ending cosmic hierarchy displaces humankind from its throne atop the tree of life, for there is no such tree. Instead, life is a bush with many branches, no one of which is privileged, none higher than the others. In support of what some deep ecologists call radical biocentric egalitarianism, other anti-hierarchical environmentalists adopted the language of systems theory, according to which all phenomena are merely strands in the great cosmic web. In this web, humans have no special status vis-a-vis plants, animals, or physical habitat. Instead, humans are merely one species among others striving to enhance their reproductive advantage over against their competitors. Read sociobiologically, concepts such as rights and values are merely useful fictions bestowing a measure of justification to nature-dominating practices aimed at enhancing the power of humankind over other life forms. In view of all this and more, much more, environmental ethics seems not only impossible, but worse, it's an embarrassment to the scientifically sophisticated. So perhaps we should just get on with the business of serving the biological imperative at work within us, namely turning the entire planet into a manageable and hopefully sustainable habitat suitable for supporting an ever-expanding human population. Now, neither biologists nor naturalistic environmentalists would offer a moral critique of non-human species that maximize their reproduction. Even population crash and extinction may result if a species were to population crash and extinction may result if a species were to overshoot its carrying capacity. But there would be no moral failing involved. For the human animal, too, only a prudential ought can be recommended. We ought to alter our behavior toward the non-human domains only if we wish to promote long-term human survival. Yet many environmentalists insist that a moral ought to apply here. We ought to limit our behavior, including our own reproductive drive, so that other life forms can survive and prosper. The often tacit presupposition that only humans are morally responsible for their behavior conflicts with naturalism, which has difficulty accounting for morality, values, and the ought in their own terms, along with the other interior domains to which access can be gained, to which access cannot be gained by the third-person methods employed by the natural and social sciences, methods that work terrifically in other realms. Now, for those who are unsatisfied with the paradoxical situation in which environmental ethics is undermined by the naturalism favored by environmentalists, there are some alternatives. One is the work of Holmes Rawlston III, which I admire, his work I admire very much. Another is a work developed by Ken Wilber, known as integral theory, according to which the cosmos may be regarded as a nested hierarchy, or holarchy, he calls it, whose constituents can be described in terms of multiple perspectives, including those involving the third person, and this is a point of view adopted by the social and natural sciences. The second person, this is the point of view adopted by the humanities, and the first person, the domain of phenomenology, aesthetics, and the fine arts. But Wilber insists that however successful the methods of the natural and social sciences may be, and they have been tremendously successful, these methods pertain only to third-person phenomena, that is, to objects. Without interiority, objects lack the capacity, however meager, to constitute a perspective of their own within which to regard or to take into account other things. So by restoring an appropriate position for interiority to the cosmos, we can solve two related problems. First is a widespread modern sense that self-aware humankind is a freaky accident in a completely meaningless material universe within which there is really no place for awareness of any sort. We got into this in philosophy about 10 years ago when there were a flurry of articles written about zombieism. You know, what does consciousness add to being human? It's unclear why it's even needed. Could we not just be regarded from the outside as the sum of our behaviors? There's no real need for adding the fact that you're sitting there in your seat having a first-person experience. Alienated from body, emotion, nature, and even consciousness, the abstract human ego sets out to know and control the material world that seems simultaneously very real and yet wholly other. Now, the second problem is a widespread eco-romantic conviction that only by renouncing mind, consciousness, rationality, and other allegedly alienating features of human consciousness, and only by reabsorbing ourselves within the patterns of nature, that is, only by scraping off the sorry accretions imposed by 10,000 years of civilization, can humankind regain its lost unity with Mother Nature. Despite important differences, both the modern abstract ego and the modern eco-romantic share something in common, a kind of one-dimensional ontology, according to which the only things that exist are the surfaces or exterior aspects of things, as they appear in terms of a third-person perspective. But Wilber maintains that interiority is a basic feature of reality, every bit as real in its own way as matter, energy, space, or time. David Chalmers, a very well-known contemporary philosophy of mind, represents this position, which is a basis for a kind of panpsychism, with which I have a lot of affinity and which is, in a sense, a theoretical framework for what traditional societies have appreciated as the animistic aspect of all phenomena, that they are all somehow ensouled. From this point of view, would be that they all have the capacity for taking a perspective. Now, what would happen to our conception of terrestrial nature at many different scales if researchers assumed that the phenomena they study, including animals and plants and more, had an interior aspect that would have to be taken into account in order fully to characterize the phenomenon in question? How would the sciences of ecology have to change? Indeed, how would environmentalism have to change, perhaps especially with regard to its troubled relationships with human beings, who are endowed with an extensive linguistically enhanced mode of subjectivity? Now, the loss of interiority, or I should say the loss of credibility of the interior domains, began 300 years ago with a movement away from the ascent tradition in the Middle Ages, which encouraged people to aspire to have the soul return to God, and there was a concomitant discounting of the material world, and the rise of the descent tradition, in which moderns emphasize that only by transforming the earth and by transforming human institutions could we develop the kind of well-being that was promised by religion in heaven. So the descent program of modernity either denied the path of ascent, which ascribed to the belief that there are interior domains that cannot be discerned by the eye of flesh, or else reconceived it as the endless horizontal movement of economic and scientific development. In attempting to open up a free space for science, economics, politics, philosophy, and art, moderns ended up throwing out the spiritual baby with the bathwater. So Wilber argues that the battle between ascenders and descenders is the central and defining conflict in the Western mind. Let me move on to, having to leave out a lot of stuff. And of course, everything that you have a question about or think that should have been included is included in what I'm leaving out here. So. Now, following Max Weber and Habermas, who based their distinctions on Kant's three critiques, the critique of pure reason, the critique of practical reason, and the critique of judgment, Habermas and Weber and Wilber divide the domains of reality into three major domains. The domain studied by the natural and social sciences, the first-person domain, the domain of aesthetics and fine arts and first-person experience, and the intersubjective domain of culture. Now, differentiating these domains is a tremendous achievement of modernity. It's what distinguishes modernity from pre-modern cultures. It means you don't have the church telling scientists what to do, and it means you don't have politics run out of the backyard of priests and so on. It opens up free space for different modes of activity, inquiry, and self-expression. But these domains were not successfully integrated. They flew apart to some extent. And one of these domains, one of these perspectives, the natural science and the social science perspective, the third-person its perspective, pretty much triumphed. So we have today, this is one reason we're having this conference, it's the third-person perspective, these powerful methods employed by the natural and social sciences, which have been the primary ways in which we've understood environmental problems and our relationship to nature. There's absolutely no way that we should do anything but include and applaud these perspectives, but they're not enough. These other two perspectives, the first and second-person perspectives, need to be restored. Now, the modern ego sought to disenchant nature, both to eliminate any lingering concerns about violating Mother Nature and to achieve the ideal of moral and rational objectivity. So long as one's moral reasoning process are influenced by biological factors, emotions, as long as one's moral judgments are tainted by personal, familial, tribal, or racial factors, one is not truly rational, impartial, and thus fully human. So following Kant, the modern ego sought to transcend the domain of particularity and corporeality to become universal and impartial. But this quest had major problems. First, moderns could not really admit to a domain transcending the material plane. In other words, if it's all just a bunch of matter following the laws of motion, what is the status of the ego, of consciousness? Where does it belong? It sort of sits out here in a domain that could be accounted for. And the driving impulse of much contemporary philosophy of mind and neuroscience is simply to eliminate it altogether, since it's apparently not a needed addition to our understanding of what knowledge and experience is about. To make up for its own conceptual erasure, in other words, to make up for the fact that the mind, consciousness, interiority was vanishing, so Wilber argues, the modern ego engages in extraordinary nature-dominating agency. To demonstrate its own existence, in other words, the ego sets out to subjugate the material plane, the only domain that supposedly exists. Now, the second problem with the modern quest for transcendence was that the justifiable differentiation between mind and body, mind and brain, as it were, ended up in an unjustifiable dissociation. The rational ego wanted to rise above nature and its own bodily impulses so as to achieve a more universal compassion found nowhere in nature. But it often simply repressed these natural impulses instead, repressed its own biosphere, repressed its own life juices, repressed its own vital roots. This is the impulse behind a lot of the contemporary deep nature, deep green movements to some extent. The ego tended to repress both external nature and internal nature. And this repression, no doubt, would have something to do with the emergence of Sigmund Freud, who arrived exactly at this time to doctor the dissociation of modernity. Now, the Romantic reaction against humanity-nature dualism and against the repression following it was justified to a large extent because something was wrong. Nevertheless, Romantic efforts to heal this rift often went astray because they used competing definitions of nature without clarifying the distinction. Supposedly, modernity had lost touch with the web of life, despite asserting that everything is enclosed and flows within it. Well, I mean, if everything's in it, how can we have lost touch with it? This is the problem. In positing that culture is deviated from nature, the Romantics had to posit a second conception of nature from which humankind can deviate. So Wilbur asks, what's the relation of this nature with a capital N that embraces everything versus this nature with a small n that's different from culture because it's getting ruined by culture? Now, great Romantics such as the German idealist Schelling sought to reconcile this conflict by saying that nature with a big N is spirit, because all-embracing spirit does transcend and include both culture and nature. Most Romantics, however, were committed to the descent path, as were other moderns. Romantics are moderns. They're not pre-modern. They simply identified nature with nature. They identified spirit with sensory nature, in effect. But the closer you get to this nature, to sensory nature, the more egocentric you become. This is a matter of moving back, in a sense, in terms of development. And in search of nature with a capital N, that is the all-encompassing spirit nature, which includes mind and body, interior and exterior, the Romantics headed back to nature with a small n and disappeared into their own selfhood, into a kind of divine egoism, as it sadly turned out. So if Wilbur's right, back to nature fantasies are a reprise of a failed Romantic effort to overcome the humanity-nature split. Instead of moving forward in evolution to the emergence of nature or spirit or world soul that would indeed unify the differentiated mind and body, Romantics simply recommend going back to nature. Such a view invites psychological and social regression. And this involves also calling for us to dismantle culture. If you read the literature that Braun has been reading for years, and some on the part of some deep ecologists and others, there's a tremendous anti-modernist attitude that's deeply troubling. I say this as someone who wrote two books on Heidegger, the second of which had to address his anti-modernity, which was involved with his affiliation with National Socialism, a very painful experience for me. And one reason why my mentor, Ed Ballard, said a philosopher should never publish anything before he's 50, or she's 50, for that matter. Let me move on to this. Now, the restoration of interiority to all phenomena, and this I take it to be the major import of this conference, the restoration of the interior domain, all right, is crucial. In a cosmos in which interiority is assumed to be a near universal feature, human awareness would not be regarded as a weird accident, but rather as a dramatic extension of the interiority everywhere present in terrestrial life and beyond. Now, could we go ahead and put the, I'm going to give you a model. Now, this is Integral Ecology, the book I'm writing. And I'm going to give you a model of this. Now, this is an intuition. It's a representation. It's a work of art, all right? So you have to understand. It's a metaphor. It's a, whatever, a trope, etc. I'll call on Larry to help me with this. So I'm not claiming any kind of exact equivalence, but I want to give you a feeling for this. So what is this? This is a mandala from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Gui Samaja mandala. And this is the first stage in representing it. This is the structure of the Vedic altar. Buddhism arose as a development out of Hinduism, in effect. And this would be the outlines of the basic structure of the Vedic altar. Now we could say that this corresponds to the initial, after the Big Bang, the initial development of space-time and the emergence of atomic structures. So we're talking about the earliest stages of development. What's next? Here we are, a later stage in the construction of the mandala, which corresponds to the unfolding of the universe, cosmic evolution. Here we have a lot more in place. Molecules have arisen. The universe has become increasingly complex. The stars have already been through the first generation, and they spewed out their heavy elements as they went into their nova stages. Now we have the basis on planet Earth for the next stage, which is the fully colored mandala. This would be the glorious full-color planet called Earth with all of its life forms on it. And this is what many scientists are attracted to, many environmentalists, including myself. It's the nature in all of its glory, nature of a certain type. Now, what is missing? This is the next step in understanding the mandala. That is missing. This is a architectural floor plan for a three-dimensional palace, which is that. Now, I'm saying that, so if you look at the mandala, see again from the top, see these are the palace walls, these are the gates, this is the cosmos, the circle that surrounds it. The mandala is a psychocosmogram, which embraces the entire universe as understood within one of the lineages in Vajrayana Buddhism. But it's a three-dimensional palace. It's not a two-dimensional palace. And what I'm arguing for that this represents is the interiority, you see, which we can't see by looking at the mandala only from those top two dimensions. So no matter how gorgeous the natural world is, and our heart goes out to it in its glory, there's also this dimension to it, not only to us as human beings, but to natural phenomena. They contain this interiority of their own. And this is sensed by and appreciated by earlier peoples with their attitudes of animism and so on, however problematic we find those. There's something to what these people are talking about. This is the basis, it seems to me, for a lot of the kind of things, again, that Braun was talking about. There's people have a sense about this, that nature is not mere stuff that has no inner dimension. It's akin to us and we to it. It has this extra dimension to it, and if we don't understand that, then we don't really fully understand what we're dealing with. And I think that's one of the things we lost in modernity. And the question is how to bring this back, how to recover this in a way that honors the contributions of modern natural and social science and retains the achievements of modernity, including our appreciation for democracy and all the good things about modernity. Can we pull this off? This, I think, is the big question. Now, I'll just put up here real quickly, because I'm running out of time. This is Wilbur's way of mapping this whole thing. You have the exterior and interior dimensions of phenomena, all of which are either individual or collective. And exterior phenomena are approached in this third person point of view from the physical behavioral sciences and the social systemic sciences. And intersubjective second person phenomena are approached in terms of cultural world space issues. This includes religion and philosophy and literature. Intentional first-person phenomena, that's your own first-person experience, and aesthetic experience and appreciation, as well as the fine arts. You may call these the big three, the domain of its, the domain of I, and the domain of you, we, as it were. What's that? Yeah. Interior. I'm missing. It disappeared. That's how small the interior's gotten in our day and time. This is what he calls the all-quadrant matrix diagram. This is terrific stuff. I don't have time to go into it. But this is the domain of its, the social sciences and system sciences, the individual sciences and behavioral sciences, the development that goes on in terms of self from early tribal consciousness all the way up to contemporary and beyond. And these are cultural systems and the belief systems which accompany it. And his claim is that these are all evolving along with each other. That evolution takes place in all four of these domains more or less at the same time, and you can't have one without the other. Let me see what else I've got. Four perspectives from which to analyze any phenomenon. If you've got some kind of, for example, an animal, you're going to need to analyze it in terms of behavioral and physiological perspectives, in terms of its own social system, in terms of the cultural intersubjective world space of that animal, as well as whatever the first-person experience is of the animal. The animal has some kind of little interior domain, probably bigger than we think. And all those have to be taken into account if you're going to provide the whole picture of what this animal is. These domains have different types of truth claims. I'm just going to move on from here. Now, the amazing thing, of course, is that the entire university system is organized along these lines. The natural sciences, the social sciences and ecosystem sciences, the humanities, and the arts and fine arts, and aesthetics, and so on. Now, if you ever wondered why the university has this organization, it's because somewhere back there, when the universities were organized, everyone took it for granted that these domains of inquiry actually corresponded to some aspect of reality. They weren't just made up. But what's happened is that these domains are really really in the saddle in these domains, as everyone knows who's in a university, these are the ones that don't get any funding. And let's face it, the NEH is not funded like the NIH or the NSF, let's face it. Let me just end with this because I'm running out of time, and I had this cool thing about Aldo Leopold. Fortunately, Ron's already done it. Here's what Aldo Leopold had to say. For one species, I quote this, and I got this, in fact, from Gus Ditzeriga, who's sitting right over here. Thank you for this quote. In fact, I refer to you. Thanks to Gus for this. For one species to mourn the death of another is a new thing under the sun. Did you hear what I said? For one species to mourn the death of another is a new thing under the sun. There's never been a species in the history of the entire planet who is sorry that a species was killed off. But we, who have lost our passenger pigeon, mourn the loss. Had the funeral been ours, the pigeons would hardly have mourned us. Now, this is not to say that we don't have any kinship with the pigeon, for we do. But it does emphasize that there is something special about human beings that needs to be honored and acknowledged if we're going to be serious about doing the work we have to do in order to address the real problems facing us in inhabiting this beautiful planet. So, thank you very much.